Hey everyone, how's it going? Welcome back to another Demystifying Post-Production Monday. I'm Ellie and I'm joined with my good friend Dustin. How's it going, Dustin?
Hi everyone, it's going good. I'm
Good,
excited.
cool.
Monday.
Yeah, I'm excited to be here too and to see everyone. And hey to all the people in the chat who are saying hey. And yeah, thanks for the belated birthday, Ben. I appreciate that. So before we get into what we're going to be doing today, let me just show you guys, all the cool stuff that's happening over the next couple of weeks as the Maxon training team. So today we're running Demystifying Post-Production. We're doing part 3. So what we're going to be doing is Dustin's going to be showing some cool stuff inside of Redshift. So originally the plan, Jonas was going to be doing some of the holiday breakdown animations, but instead that's going to be next week. So we've kind of just swapped those weeks over. And on Wednesday, we are running a hands-on with Maxon Redshift workshop. So I'm running that with my good friend Chad, and we're up to part 3 already. I can't believe how quickly it's going. It's crazy. Time just flies. And we're going to be looking at Redshift lights and also some camera and post effect stuff ready for the final week next week. And then moving on Thursday, we have a special Master Trainer where Master Trainers Noseman and Jonas are going to be talking all about MoGraph inside of Cinema 4D, getting you guys ready for that certification if it's something that you guys are interested in. And then last but not least, we also have a really, really great live talk show with Seth and Hashi, which is VFX and Chill. And if you haven't checked that out already, I definitely would. And one other thing I want to talk about is next week's or next month's Demystifying Post-Production series is Raise Your Redshift Game. So me, Lionel and Dustin are going to be diving into some more, I would say, intermediate level Redshift topics. So we're going to be looking at rendering particles, volumes, looking at subsurface scattering, as well as some really cool layering materials. So that should be, if that's something you're interested in, then definitely register for those. So yeah, as you can see, we've got a whole load of stuff going on. And if you ever miss any of our sessions, then don't worry, because we do actually have our own Maxon Training Team YouTube channel, where, as you can see, we pretty much record everything that we do and we love to put it on there. And it's all time-stamped as well. So if you don't want to go through the entire hour or 2 hours of a session, you can just find the specific bit you're after. And so if you have a look on here, we can see our upcoming live streams, as well as Demystifying Post-Production playlist. So if you missed the last 2 sessions, so last week Lionel did some really amazing stuff with animating cloth inside of C4D. So if you missed that, that's where you can check that out. All of these links should actually be in the handout section of GoToWebinar. So here we go, you can see these links. If you can't see them, let me know in the chat or let me know in the questions and I can just link them to you guys. And for anyone who is new to any of these sessions, we love to give away free t-shirts. We love a bit of Maxon merch. And so feel free to click that link. It's good for 1 shirt. All you have to do is pay for the shipping, $4, euros, wherever you're from. And you have to use the password O2 Beautiful Stuff, which is here. But again, if you need it, let me know and I can link that for you. That's not a problem at all. And finally, we do actually have some project files for you guys to access, so you can go back, break them down, follow along, whatever suits you best, and you can definitely be doing that. So, Dustin, what are we going to be doing today? What are you going to be showing these wonderful people?
Yeah, so what I'm actually going through is kind of how I got into photographic lighting. So in the last webinar that we did, Lionel was talking about lighting fabric and doing different things, and I had made mention about some of the techniques that I use for lighting, and saw that there were some questions about it that happened in the chat. And so we're going to dive into that a little bit, and I'm going to show you what my light exploration looks like for the photography that I do. So yeah, that's what we're gonna dive into, and then we'll get into some kind of fun stuff, different types of lighting setups that I like, how that all works, and then possibly using some cool lens effects, and we'll talk a little bit about that here in a moment. So let's see if I can show you my screen here.
Cool. Yeah. Do you want to take it, or do you want me to chuck it over?
Go ahead and just you can chuck it over.
Sweet. There you go. There you go. Yeah, this sounds like some cool topics though. I'm excited.
Let me see if I can minimize some of this stuff here a moment. Oh, the screens today. There we go.
Are you flexing with all of your screens?
No, I mean, it's two screens. There's just
all
stuff
my
all over.
screens.
Okay, can you see my screen?
Yep, we can see it.
Okay, awesome. So if you don't know the type of work that I do, let's actually go ahead and I'm going to hide my video here so we can make this a bit larger on the final screen. And so, yeah, if you don't know the type of work that I run a cosplay photography business. And so I like to take superheroes and Jedis, different subjects, and place them in fun environments using Cinema 4D, Redshift, some Octane, bunch of fun stuff. And this all came after my time in getting into 3D. And so for the 3D side in the industry, what I did was product rendering. And so these are kind of examples here. If you've seen some of the work that I do, like we were just showing, a lot of it is very similar in the dark and moody type of feel. I've done plenty of the white studio, we call them white sweeps, or silhouette type shots for e-commerce. We've done plenty of that, but my favorite type of lighting is the moody, dramatic lighting, stuff that's quite cinematic. And so getting into some of this stuff has really helped me in the photography world. And so as I started learning photography, I started working with very basic light setups. And this is actually the same setup that I'll use at Comic-Con events when I'm shooting. And we're going to set this up today here in a moment. But what this allows us to do is go in and quite infinitely play with lighting ideas and concepts. And for each of my Comic-Con events, I have a set standard type of setup that I like to work with. And then every now and then I'll have a little bit more time, a little bit more flexibility during the day, and I'll start to play with these ideas. And so what these small renders actually become for me are types of cheat sheets for different gels and lighting that I can place into that environment and really make people pop. So let's go ahead and move that out of the way here. And so what we have here is the basic setup in Redshift. Now, I don't currently have any lights in this space. Let's see in the bottom here, we'll just change this to perspective. There we go. And we can see that this is a backdrop. It's an 8 by 10 foot high backdrop to mimic what I have at the events that I'm working in. And then we have Caesar here about 6 feet high. And this is like my general go-to type of scenario. So as far as what's really going on here in this scene, so we can open this up, I have a target null that I have placed right around Caesar's eyes here, just in case I need that. And that's what we're going to be able to use to target our rim lights and our key light, just to help us move around a little bit more easily. And then I have the cube and the cylinder here, which are really just a pedestal that Caesar is currently attached in. Ellie, feel free to let me know if there's any questions.
Oh yeah, definitely. As soon as they come in, I'll yeah, give you a shout.
Yeah, awesome. And so what we want to do is start to build some of the lighting in this scene. And one of the biggest reasons that I thought it would be a good idea to get into lighting here this week with Jonas out is I really have strong feelings about lighting, both in photography and in 3D. And that's light can make or break a scene. And so it's really important to get into this and start learning it. Maybe not so technical on the photography side, because we have quite a few more options, on the 3D side, but understanding the techniques and where lights are placed, why they're placed there, and how to really emphasize the silhouette of a character are all very good things to know. So Ellie, I know we had previously talked about that. Do you have any thoughts on that type of, I guess, on kind of that theory of like photography versus 3D and the importance of it?
Yeah, so I guess I think it always is going to benefit your workflow, understanding how something like photography works, and like how you would light something in the real world is kind of transferable to how you would then light it in 3D to get that really nice look. As I'm sure like that's probably what, like you were saying, what benefits you're working inside of C4D and Redshift now with all of your experience in photography.
Yeah, and it's fun because it goes back and forth for me. You know, I started off in 3D and then used some of the lighting techniques that I had learned there once I started getting into photography. And now, as a photographer, I start to use different techniques from photography to pull directly into 3D. So it really helps out in understanding the space. All right, so let's go ahead and set up the lighting setup here that we're going to be using. So we're really basically going to be talking about my favorite 3-light setup. Not traditional 3-point lighting, but it's two rim lights and a key light. And then we'll start to talk about maybe bounce lighting and negative fills on top of that. These are things that I use not only for my subjects, but I also use this in product rendering as well. So what we'll do first here is go ahead and we can pull in, we'll just say a Redshift area light. And now I generally do set these up physically to my lighting that I have. So my lighting is the 12 by 56 strip lights. And so what we'll do is we can go ahead and set this up. I'll change my camera to a top camera here. And we'll go ahead and just move this to the back of the backdrop. And this is exactly the same lighting setup that I'm using at Comic-Con events. So it makes it a bit easy. We can go ahead here and press Shift-C for the commander, type in target, grab a target tag here, and then we can open up our Caesar mesh and we'll pull our target null into our target object. And so now that's just going to flip right around and face our subject here. So we can name this one rim left or camera left there. And then we can control or command, click and drag, and we can duplicate this to the other side here. And then we can name this one rim right. Now for the key light, we'll start the render view here in a moment. For the key light, we'll just go ahead and grab another area light. And we can head down to our shape settings here in the attribute manager, and we can change these as soon as it's done saving here. There we go. Now we can change these to 24 by 24 because I like to use 24-inch beauty dishes when I'm shooting. And now with this set here, we can also change our shape to a disc. And then we'll go ahead and control or command, click and drag our target tag from our rim lights to our key light. Let's go ahead and rename that here as well. All right. So we'll just go ahead and move this out of the way a little bit. We can change it back into our perspective camera here. And for the sake of not having flat lighting, we'll go ahead and we can just move our key light about 45 degrees off to the side here of the face. And at this point, we'll go ahead and save, and then I'll start the render view so that we can see what's happening here.
Dustin, quick question while we're waiting for that
Yeah.
to load. I'm sorry if you've mentioned this. I've just been answering some questions in the chat. Do you always build everything in sort of real world scale? So you were saying how you like to change your size of your lights to 24-inch because that's what you use for your in-world setups, right? So do you do the same in Redshift?
I do like to work in as close to real world scale as possible. That's a tongue
Yeah,
twister.
that is.
So I like to work in that as much as possible. And especially when I'm working in a set like this or a scene like this, it's important to me because my physical lights are, I mean, they have a physical size. And so when I'm shooting at a Comic-Con event, I usually have what are called 2 inline booths. So it's a 10-foot wide by 20-foot long space that I have to shoot in. And so when I started building this setup initially, I had to build it as close to real world as possible so that I knew what type of spacing I actually had to work with within the space that I was setting up. And so I actually don't have the project file, I believe, on this computer, but I actually built out the entire Comic-Con or event setup in 3D completely, so I could actually space out my marketing, uh, you know, physical
Yeah.
stuff, my banners and all of that. So real world scale is important. For lighting, it's important, but also for materials. And so I try to work in that as much as possible. There is a little bit of creative freedom in there, but sticking as close to is definitely a plus.
Cool. Cool. Thanks.
Yeah, so let's see here. For the background, we're going to take our rim lights. We're going to move those in just a little bit so we're not breaking into the background. And so once we get these set up, the first thing that we're going to see is that we really need to go in and rebalance here quite a bit. Now, I'm not so focused on overall exposure because, as I said last week, I do like to work with ambient lighting first when I'm really getting this set up. And in fact, we can go ahead and do that now before we even balance, so that'll help that setup even better. So we'll turn off all of the lighting that we've just created. And what we're going to do is bring in a dome light. And what I'm usually looking for in these ambient setups, we'll go ahead and remove the background as well here. What I'm looking for in these ambient setups is what I would consider to be maybe my shutter speed, settings that I would use out in the physical world. So my photography lights, I use the flashpoint system. So it's an R2 trigger based lighting. And so everything is ran for me currently off of batteries when I'm out on location. So it allows me to take my lighting anywhere and I can expose from my background and then start to light my subject in a much more controlled environment outdoors. And so I actually use that same type of setup once I get into 3D. So what we can do here is go ahead with the dome light. We're going to find an HDRI. So we can go ahead and open the asset browser here. Give this a moment to load up a little bit. You can type in HDRI. There we go. And what we'll do, we'll just use this overcast HDRI here on the bottom. So we can go ahead and we'll drag this. Well, let's see. There we go. Go ahead and drag that right into our texture slot for the dome light. All right, there we go. Let's go ahead and close out the asset browser. And so what I'm looking at, as soon as I get this set up, let's go ahead and make our render view a little bit larger here. What I'm looking for, especially if I'm trying to control the lighting in a bit more of something like I would use in the physical world, I'm going to go ahead and actually drop my saturation of the dome light because I'm only focused on filling some of the shadows that are currently here, and this is more primarily for this type of setup. Now, when I'm shooting at events, it is very difficult to always gauge the lighting before I get on set And that's because sometimes you move different locations in a venue and you're not exactly sure what's going to be there. So for me, I like to desaturate these HDRIs, and I can adjust for that once I'm on set. And what we'll do here is just go ahead and take the intensity, and we can drop this down a ways. I'm just looking for a nice kind of a soft shadow fill in certain areas down here at the bottom where these can really get dark if I'm not careful. And this is why I like to use kind of an overcast, decently ambient type of lighting. Now we do see here that we have this shadow that's going right across Caesar's face. So let's go ahead and take our dome light and we'll just rotate this. See if we can work that around to the other side for a little bit more of an ambient hit. There we go. All right. And now if I want to go in with the exposure, I can take this down just a little bit to get a little bit darker, as we're already getting quite low here with the intensity. So this is somewhere roughly where I may start with that. And so this is giving us a decent base. And we can go ahead and turn on the rest of our lighting that we have here. And at this point, now we can see it's even brighter than it was before having any of that ambient lighting really affecting the scenario here. And so we'll go ahead and we'll start turning off all of our lights. The way that I actually like to work, in physical photography and even with products, especially when I'm working in 3D, is to focus on the silhouette first. And so that's where these two rim lights are going to come into play. And so I can start with these one at a time. And what I'm looking for here is just making sure that I'm not getting any super hot or blown out areas on the subject. There we go. And so this looks pretty good. Let's go ahead and turn on our rim light on the right side. And so for this one here, what I'm thinking we might do is actually drop this a bit. And the reason for this is very similar, again, to how I do this physically, is I like to usually have one of my rim lights brighter than the other. So as I'm starting to do compositing, this is something that I've kind of learned over my time of doing all of this, is that it's not always a good idea to have rim lights that are equal on both sides when it comes to compositing, because I can always boost this in post with a little bit of extra retouching, but it can be very difficult to actually tone those down in a realistic manner. So if I have, say, sun direction that's coming from one side, I generally like to have the rim light on the other side playing a little bit more off of what might just be the ambient sky or a slightly brighter sky, having these rim lights come across the back. And so with the subjects here, we'll go ahead and take our rim light on the right side here, and we'll drop that down a bit. Okay, I can see Alfredo's question here. What kind of computer specs do you have to render that fast? I'm running two 2080 Ti's currently, Alfredo, and so that's probably that's why the rendering is happening pretty quickly here. And this is a very simple scene setup, so I'm sure if we were to get a bit heavier than this, as we might see later, it'll take a little bit longer to render.
There's also a quick question. I don't know if you've seen it from Jay. Do you ever save your Redshift lighting setups at all?
For me, I do have a version of this that's actually saved on my other computer. That's a very heavy scene because I have a ton of different light setups. I probably should have used takes for those, but I have a ton of different lighting setups inside that file, which is the heavy one. but I usually just keep one file saved out for this specifically, and then I just build as each project is kind of different, whether you're dealing with products or whether you're dealing whether you're dealing with products or whether you're dealing with, say, matching a subject's lighting scenario. I usually just build them fairly quickly from scratch. So yeah, and if I need to, there are times where I will repurpose projects for sure. So I'll open a project, copy and paste my lighting scenario out of that project into another one, and that's how I'll go about it if I need to go that route. So hopefully that answers the question.
Cool. Yeah. Thanks.
All right. So let's go ahead and turn on our Keylight. This one's going to be quite bright for us here. A bigger light source. You can bring that up just a little bit to get some brow shadowing happening here. And we'll go ahead and we'll take down the intensity of this one as well. Let's pull that off into the left even further. Give it a little bit of maybe just a Rembrandt triangle here. It helps for a little bit more dramatic and cinematic look. All right. Okay, let's see here. I see there are questions that are coming up. Feel free to to make those as we start to get into this, because I do know that there are going to be questions as we start to move. I do see one here that's let's see, maybe a dumb question. There are no dumb questions, but
There definitely aren't
why?
any dumb questions.
Yeah, why have you changed the EV in the left light and intensity from the right? Okay, so in our rim light on the left side, I haven't changed the EV on this side. I think you may have been just talking about the exposure. And the reason for that is because I have my intensity quite low for the dome light. And so I took the exposure or the EV down on that a little bit. So I wasn't really starting to get, I guess maybe it's just something not to break my brain. Like getting minute into small decimals here with the intensity. That definitely happens. And so I just dropped the exposure a little bit to kind of save myself some time, if you will. So there is a difference between when I would normally use that, and we can talk about this actually with the Keylight. So the intensity here, let's turn off the rest of our lighting, and we'll just focus on the Keylight here. Okay, so with the intensity, you'll see, and I'll do this, I'm sure, in other webinars as well once we get a bit further into Redshift while I'm on the webinars. And you'll see that once I start to get down to very low increments, we don't really have to worry about hotspots. And so for me, I usually adjust the intensity first, and I get this to a point like maybe here, we'll just say something like 15, where I like the lighting fall off that this has on the body. And what I'm going to focus a little bit more now on is the specular highlights and some of the hot spots that we're getting. And this is actually where I'll start to take the exposure down just a little bit. And we'll see that immediately, even just taking this down maybe a third here, that we're really not getting any of those hot spots anymore. And this is getting a little bit more manageable, but I do like the overall intensity that I had. I just want to kind of get away from some of those blown out areas. I'm not sure, am I explaining that pretty well, Ellie? On how you would use that in practice versus the notebook side of it?
Yeah, no, I think that explains it really well. That's how I'd go about it.
Awesome. Okay, is progressive rendering better than bucket rendering for the Redshift render view?
Yeah, what are your
Progressive.
thoughts on this?
Oh man, I get asked this a lot, and every time that I get asked, I'm like, brain fart on. I'm like, how I would. It's like not really a general answer. It really depends on what you're doing. For me, so right now, progressive rendering is crushing it. If I needed to really say get into optimizing noise and things like that, that's where I would definitely head into bucket mode or a final rendering mode. But progressive for me actually works quite well most of the time. So for a lot of the work I'll do, I may get to this point where, we get in and, as far as the noise or the grain is concerned, it's clean enough for me for even say a personal project. And I'll just go ahead and I can save this right out of the render view here and I'll composite this image. Um, bucket rendering is great, but it's a little bit too slow for me and kind of my impatient self when I'm working. And so I like to stay in progressive mode as long as possible. And then as I start to finalize a scene, I'll move into buckets and play the slow game there. So
Yeah, I
hopefully
think
that
I was gonna,
answers your question.
I think my answer would pretty much be the same, especially if you're like starting to first build up a scene and you're making loads of changes and constant updates. You don't, like you were saying, you don't want to have to wait for that bucket render every single time. Having that progressive render, it is faster, even if you don't get that final result. You are still seeing these updates immediately, and then like you were saying, Dustin, when it comes down to then like those final really accurate changes that you need to then see how everything's
Yeah.
looking, I then do the same. I'll sometimes just stick on the like preview render area and then like bucket render like a particular part just to give me like an idea to save some time.
Yeah, definitely. Um, so let's see. What are my settings for progressive mode? Settings for progressive mode. We can go into the render settings here, and we'll head over to basic into Redshift. So my passes right now are at 1024. This is actually just standard, really.
Yeah, I was gonna say that's
Um,
default, isn't it?
yeah, it's default. Now, if I wanted to go a bit faster, I mean, let's go ahead and try this. I'm going to save my scene first. But I
top
feel
top
like,
tip. Always save
yeah,
it.
top tip, save often uh, before you start to make changes. So let's go to, we'll just say 512. It might not make as much of a difference here for what you guys may see on the stream, but 512 runs fine. And this is something that I actually change quite a bit more, say, when I'm using something like Octane, and I will really get into, optimizing and, saving kind of a progressive setup there. But in Redshift, I mean, we could probably go to, let's try 128 and see how that looks here. It still renders out for us quickly. And we can see it once we get into the shadows quite a ways. But it still does pretty good overall. So we'll go ahead and we can set this to default 1024. The one thing that I do actually change here is my undersampling. So my undersampling is at 4. So that also helps quite a bit with, a little bit more if I'm moving and kind of navigating in the space, but it's definitely helps to, lower the resolution um, of your first couple passes there so that you can get a bit more of a speedy render view. Okay, so Thomas, I see that you asked, do you leave the light on 100% white or do you go down a bit there? I definitely go down. So let's get to this here and continue on a moment. So let's go ahead and turn on our rim light on the right side. So we have a nice little setup here. Left side, it's going to be maybe the sunlight coming off of the back side here. And then we can turn on our dome light for a bit of the ambient. And now that's helping fill in some of those shadows. Okay. So pretty good setup. Now let's talk about the lighting itself and how I personally like to work with this. Um, when I'm at Comic Cons, I generally will shoot with kind of a white or whiter light. And so what we'll do, we can go ahead and turn off our key and we can leave our rim light on. I think for this setup, we can select our right and left rims. And then we'll change our color mode here down to temperature. And so normally for me, this is where some of this adjustment can really come into play. So if I want a bit more of a cool light here, there are times where I'll go ahead and use corrective gels. But somewhere around 5200 is a pretty good spot that I like to keep a lot of my lighting because it's fairly neutral. So it is a bit warmer than 6500 Kelvin, but it gives me just a little bit more play if I want to warm that up in post, which is most often what I'm actually going to do. So that's where I'll sit here for the key light. We can go ahead and turn this on. And now for the key light, let's go ahead and not color and temperature. There we go. We can go straight to temperature, and then we can do 5200 for this as well. So this is going to be more or less how I'll start off if I'm going for the type of lighting that I would just have set for every single cosplayer, and I'll let my cameras, kind of color temperature and setup work from that as well. But when I'm working and I'm exploring in 3D, it's generally a lot less. You can see here, it's actually a lot less of a standard kind of white lighting and much more trying to determine what type of lighting I'm actually going to use when it comes to gels, because that's for me something that I'd rather figure out in the pre-production side or pre-event rather than once I actually get there and my assistant has ran to the restroom or done something and now I'm having to swap out gels and do all kinds of stuff on my own. Okay, so Rod, you're asking, is there ever a time where you would consider using actual photometric data, IES lights for the lights? Not at this stage for this type of stuff specifically. When I'm working with products or especially interior renderings, definitely. Um, when, when I got this setup basically kind of in mind, I didn't really know a whole lot about photography setups, like completely honest. I started off lighting in 3D and I kind of built this look that I liked. Um, and that's just using inspiration from quite a few different places. If you guys have, one of the current places that I like to go is Shotdeck. Um, it's a very good, reference tool. Let me see if I can pull that up here actually. Go around. Whoop, there we go. There we go. So let's go ahead and pull up Shotdeck. So Shotdeck is an amazing place to go for inspiration. If we go ahead to browse shots, what they have is a ton of different movies, and they're basically just stills from these movies that are really meant for reading light, color. They have them broken down by focal length and many different parameters and filters we can see here on the left. Um, and so what I like to do is actually go through this type of a scenario when I'm looking for, maybe new inspiration, and then I start to build off of that. So hopefully that kind of helps. I do use photometric data if it's really necessary. I like to use creative data a lot more on a general everyday basis. Okay, so at this point here, we've kind of got just a base setup. We can go ahead and maybe turn on our background again and kind of declutter from seeing the HDRI environment there. Now, as I start to play with gels, this is where this gets to be a bit more fun. And when I'm doing this, I'm keeping both. I'm keeping kind of both photography and post-production kind of at the forefront of my mind. So the reason for this, let me see if I can pull up an image here, is that when I'm shooting a subject, it's, you know, when I'm planning it in 3D, I'll say, hey, I need an orange rim light here. I have a set of very cheap gels from Amazon that are going to get me there pretty quickly as far as having an orange. But I also know that I'm probably going to have to go in and retouch that to amplify it in post. So this is kind of why I don't focus so much on having everything set up perfectly and past like an inspiration standpoint here, because the differences in cosplay, um, outfit or costume from one to another can also dictate how my lights are going to be set up. So if I set it up one way and I think that that's going to be a standard, I found that I'm like harshly mistaken because I'm constantly changing throughout these events. And so once we get into setting up different types of moods and lighting, this is where I'll go into, say, my rim lights, and I'll maybe grab them both first, and I'll change from the temperature to color. And from here, this is where I just use the color picker and say, I wonder what a kind of fiery setup would look like here. And so we'll go ahead and set up a kind of nice orange. And then as with this type of shot here, I figured maybe I can use some type of a green or cyan to counter that. And so the pre-production for this would be fairly easy, and it would just look like heading in and changing my color of the light into something a bit more in the cyan realm. And so this is where some of these looks really start to come from, and helps me get a really good gauge on where this would actually start to take effect in the real world. Questions here?
Yeah, there are a couple of questions, quite cool ones as well. Someone was asking about like an AOV setup. So I know you do that a lot, and you have a OpenEXR kind of setup. Isn't that right, for when you bring into Photoshop? And there's another
Yeah,
one on
let's see.
volumetric lighting as well.
I have a problem with setting up Redshift to export AOVs.
Also,
Multi-channel
this lighting
export.
setup looks awesome. Like I love sort of like adding color with my lighting inside of C4D and Redshift. Like as you can see here, I think it totally changes the whole atmosphere and look of a shot.
Definitely, definitely. So let's go ahead and talk a little bit about the AOVs here. So we can head into our render settings, Redshift, advanced. Let's see. So setting up Redshift to export AOVs. So the way that I'll go about this here, and that's actually going to render out quite a bit different, regular image. So we'll start with the save here. And so once we enable the save, simply go ahead and we can change to EXR. I feel like my brain is, there we go. OpenEXR, multi-layer file, layer name is suffix, and we can go to 32 bits per channel. I do have different ways. I feel like this could get quite off topic because I love multi-channel compositing, especially in Photoshop, but it's a tricky process. So you'll want to have EXRio. I'm going to bring these up here a moment so that we can kind of see these, or ProEXR. And I'm wondering if this may be the actual issue that you might be having. Is this actually going into Photoshop, Grayson? I'm not sure if you can go ahead and just kind of leave a yes if you're going into Photoshop or if you're going into something like AfterEffects for the multi-channel compositing. So if you're going into Photoshop and you are using a Windows machine, my plugin of choice, free plugin, is EXRio. This does a really good job of, oh, let's see.
Yeah, so it's
Okay,
actually
so,
getting the files to export, it looks like.
okay. Okay, so I'll finish that sentence just for anybody that may be curious. If you're looking to bring your images into Photoshop, you want to have EXRio if you're on a PC. Awesome software, also works with CryptoMats really well, or ProEXR if you're on a Mac. Quick disclaimer about ProEXR, you can still use this. You are going to want to place the plugin in the Photoshop's plugins directory instead of the media core directory. It's a bit older of a plugin, so there's a kind of pro tip for that. So as far as getting these exported, have your file path, make sure multi-layer file is here, OpenEXR 32 bits per channel, and we can head to AOVs here and make sure that we have the multi-part EXR is going to be checked. And we can go ahead to 32-bit float depth, and I'm realizing that I have this changed from something else quite a while ago. And yeah, let's go into show our AOV manager. And this is where we're going to go ahead and start to add any of our AOVs in here that we're going to want to use. Set up our depth. And then we want to make sure that all of these are enabled. And then we also have multi-pass set up here. Okay, so let's see. I choose all the AOVs I want, but I think I'm misunderstanding where to choose the file name and export settings for Redshift, since there are direct in multi-layer files. Got it. Okay, so let's take a look at Cryptomat, because that's automatically going to have a direct output, which is going to be in the file path and the file name underscore pass. So we have the render tokens that are set up here. So where this is going to kick out, and if we do that with, say, any of these others that we set up as a direct output, it's automatically going to place the effective path underneath. We can see where that's going to save. But this is setting up the render tokens for us. So if we head back into save, multipass is where you're going to actually set this file up to save, and then all of your direct outputs are going to dump into this same folder next to your multi-pass image, if that makes sense. Does that make sense, Ellie? I hope it makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think so. Yeah, that should be helpful.
I feel like that's something that we'll also be able to dive into maybe a bit more specifically next month.
Yeah, I think
Because
that'll be a good topic to cover, won't it?
Okay, so do you often use volumetric lights? And what would your setup be in Redshift? I actually don't use volumetric lighting a whole lot in Redshift for most of the stuff that I'm doing. That's primarily because I like to do my, say, volumetrics in post-production, or sorry, getting ahead of myself there, in post-production using the Z-depth pass as layer masks in Photoshop. And so I save out the Z-depth pass as its own channel inside of Photoshop's channel panel, and then I use that as a layer mask and either use a curves adjustment layer, or I'll start to use maybe a solid color fill and really manipulate that depth pass inside the layer mask to really get the effects that I'm going for, and I'll work from there. Okay, so is it possible to output the AOVs in Photoshop layers instead of individual files? Yes, it is, and that's exactly why I personally like to use EXRs. And we'll talk about this. We did actually talk about this a little bit in a previous demystifying session. I would have to go back and find that session.
Was that the holiday ones we did in December?
Was that the one that I had the shader ball open in?
Oh no. Oh no, I don't think so.
I forget exactly which one that is. So we'll have to find it, and maybe we can yeah, maybe we can grab a link for that. But using a software like EXRio is going to read your EXR and open all of those layers inside of Photoshop directly through the plugin. So it works really easily. And yeah, so that's the way that I would go about it. Now, once you get into Photoshop, you can go ahead and then save your image as a PSD or as a PSB, a TIFF, what have you. But rendering the EXR and then using this plugin works really well just for bringing everything in. And you can also do that if you're wanting to, render out directly out of Cinema. Let's see where my render settings are here. If we wanted to go ahead here, and we can change to something like PSD. I just personally like the way that EXRs work through EXRio. So yeah, let's see, one question, can you make your light first and then materials? I actually prefer to light first and then materials, almost always. And that's because the material properties, how are we doing on time here, Ellie? I want to make sure.
Yeah, no, we're doing good. So it's about
Okay.
5:02, but we're good.
Okay, so let's go ahead, and I see that there's quite a few questions here. There is some more stuff that I wanted to go into as far as like creating cool lens effects, but we can totally talk about that next month. Like we'll have a whole session kind of on that. And a little bit more specifically like in Redshift and some of these things. So let me stop sharing my screen here a moment. There we go. And turn on video. Okay, now we're back. Awesome. And so let's see. Lighting first and then materials. So material properties are, as far as I'm concerned, almost always dependent on the lighting scenario. So I like to work with lighting first and then do my materials. And that's on most projects that I'm dealing with. There are times that I will build, say, using a shader ball scene. Next month, we have a really cool kind of session talking about layering materials and doing all of these different things. But I do like to work in shader ball scenes, but know that once I adjust that lighting, my material properties may have to change. And so if I'm working on, say, a commission or a client-based project, I like to actually send off my lighting to a client to get approved, the lighting and the camera angle. I call them dummy renders. Some people call them just clays. whatever it is. I like to get that stuff approved before I even move into materials, because if a client changes their mind and they're like, hey, we don't like that camera angle or that lighting anymore for our product, then my materials may have to change. So if I kind of jump the gun and do materials first, it's kind of working backwards in a way. So yeah, I hope that answers the question. So let's see here. Let's see. What about the AfterEffects plugin? So the AfterEffects plugin, I believe, is ProEXR. They do have that for AfterEffects as well. Looking, yep, they do. So it's for Photoshop, AfterEffects, and Premiere Pro. ProEXR should do great with that. Okay, with OCIO and ACES in current Cinema 4D, how do you color manage in Photoshop? Oh, okay. So yeah, this is awesome. Guys, I could sit here and we could talk about this stuff all day. All right. So OCIO, Open Color IO, there's a plugin on Nord for that as well, for Photoshop, that allows you to create the ACES transforms that you need. So when I'm working in Cinema 4D, a lot of times I'm actually using ACES and then rendering out the untone mapped version of that ACES render and then applying my transforms in Photoshop. So what we'll do is I'll be able to go ahead and, I'm assuming, I can check, but I have kind of a LUT setup that I use in Photoshop that basically places those LUTs that I generated through the plugin. The plugin can be a bit tough to use sometimes in Photoshop. It took me a while to figure it out and actually get these things exported. But we could definitely leave those in a download link as well. So that'll definitely help.
That'd be great, yeah.
But yeah, rendering out as far as, Cinema and Redshift go, I like to work in viewing the, ACES SDR video, and then when it comes render time, I'll go ahead and I'll disable that and work straight untone map. So I'm still getting all of the ACES information. It's just an untone mapped image, and then I apply those transforms in Photoshop. All right.
Have you seen I've got a quick question from Ken. I feel like you're the best person to ask because I know you're very proficient in both Octane and Redshift. He was asking about the main differences in setup when using Octane instead of Redshift. And earlier we had a question that was a very kind of broad question between which is better, which is, I'm sure, a question we all get, Redshift or Octane. And so instead of doing like a which is better, like in your personal experience, how do you feel about the two?
So, oh man.
No bias necessary.
This is another one of these questions that I get all the time, and every time I have to answer, I'm just like, because I love them both. Complete honesty, I love them both. Octane is beautiful. Redshift is beautiful. I love the options that I have, in Redshift with certain things. And sometimes I just love the speed and like guerrilla workflow that I have in Octane to just like, boom, get it in, kick it out quickly and move on. So for me, there's really not one that I like better. It's maybe which one I like better per scenario, and specifically what I'm doing. So yeah, I hope that answers the question, but there are little things back and forth between the two. So it makes it very different or difficult to actually answer the question. But as far as what are the main differences in setup when using Octane instead of Redshift, it's really just making sure, and maybe we could show this at some point, but figuring out exactly what kernel you want to use in Octane, because I most often will say like use a path tracing kernel, and sometimes I can use direct lighting and I really don't need path tracing. And so for me, one of the biggest bits of confusion was like when to use which kernel for what. And so once I started figuring that out a bit more from experience, it kind of made my life easier. So yeah, I hope that answers the question. Between the two, I love them both, and it's hard. It's like almost asking me like which one of my children I like better. I mean, it depends on the day. Depends on the day. So yeah. All right.
Oh, Max was asking the Jordan's render, Octane or Redshift. What did you use?
I used Octane. I've actually got I've got some stuff coming in the future that's going to be awesome in Redshift. That's going to be talking about those types of setups. I do have a
Here, guys.
tutorial.
We got the exclusive.
What's that?
We got the exclusive. We know what's coming
Yeah,
up now.
like there's some fun stuff there. I do have tutorials out there if you guys are interested. That's actually in Octane. So go ahead and company I used to work for, ProEDU, we have some cool training shoes called the Air Dusties that you can go ahead and check those out. And those will be pretty cool bits of training that, if you're interested in the beginnings of that type of setup, as far as getting much more of like the detail kind of macro shot, like hyper realism, we'll have, I've got stuff that's currently in the works for that type of scenario. So yeah. Okay.
Cool.
So yeah, keep learning Redshift. I love Redshift. I love Octane. Whenever you hear me talk about them, in the future, like there's definitely like not an area for me that's like choose this one versus this one. I feel like
I feel like it's quite a big topic that comes up, especially sort of like when people are first learning a third-party renderer. That's a question I get quite often, is kind of which should I learn, which is always obviously a very
and for me, I push people. Honestly, if you're just learning, completely just learning and starting out, I generally like to tell people that it may make more sense to go with Redshift. It can be a bit more, I guess, difficult from an extreme beginner standpoint, like entry level. It will seem more difficult, more intimidating. That's why we've got people like Ellie and myself that can make it demystified. But
love that.
it all comes in the Maxon one package, and so it's a little bit, for me that's probably my key selling point for Redshift for beginners is that you have direct support and everything right through Maxon, and so it's awesome that way.
Cool. Well, thanks so much for this, Dustin. I think it's been such an interesting hour for everyone to hear mainly your kind of professional opinion and workflow on things, and just sort of diving into that stuff inside of Cinema 4D and Redshift, and also looking at how you set up those AOVs as well, which I know is a big topic for everyone. And it's definitely, like you said, something we can cover in the March sessions when we really dive into kind of raising our Redshift game.
Yeah, I mean it's gonna be so fun next month. Like it's tough sometimes, when we have an hour, and I like to talk. And like I wish like we were all in the same room, because we'd all be just hanging out and talking and answering these questions kind of live. It's really fun. But yeah, I can't wait to get into some of the stuff that we're doing next month, because we'll be able to kind of further some of the discussions on things that we were talking about here.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah,
That'd be great. Sweet. So yeah, if anyone does want to register for those sessions, you can actually head over to the events page and register here. Just if you register on one of the weeks, it registers you for all 4 of those sessions. So don't worry that you can't see the final 2 on there just yet. And just really quickly, again, if you want to access any of the links of stuff we've been talking about, grab yourself a t-shirt, project files as well, and we'll find, Dustin will grab some of those links that you were saying about the ProEXR tutorials, because I know someone has asked about that in the questions, so we can throw those on the shared resources as well. And yeah, once again, thanks a lot, Dustin, and thanks a lot for everyone for all your questions. Like you said, like Dustin was saying, we do love to talk. We love to make this as interactive as possible and ask and answer as many of your questions as we possibly can throughout this hour. But yeah, it's been great. I hope everyone has a great rest of their week, and Dustin, I hope you do as well. And I'm sure we'll catch you on the next one.
Yeah, I appreciate it. I'm super excited. It's gonna be a lot of fun as we start to move on.
Gonna be a lot of fun. Yeah,
if there are any questions that you guys have past this, make sure to leave those once this gets posted on YouTube. Make sure to leave those down in the comments, and I try to double back and check for comments and questions every now and then there as well. So
yeah, and we also have the Maxon training team, like training@maxon.net. If they do want to ping them over, we can always, hand those over to Dustin as well to get some great answers.
Sweet.
All right, cool. Well, thanks again, everyone. And yeah, we'll see you on the next one.
Sounds good. Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.